Good morning to you and welcome back to today's JRPG Weekly update. I'm SuperDerek, and guys, we have a lot of news to cover, some of which I don't usually talk about. So let's kick this off with this top headline here. Because for over 2 decades, Eushully made itself a name in Japan with strategy JRPGs that combine deep tactical systems with adult content. And until now, their work was, well, never left really Japan officially. That changed, though, recently with Wayblazer Dämmerung, which is coming to Steam under Shiravune. I have no idea how to pronounce any of these things. This is the first time that a Eushully game has been officially localized into English, and it's generating quite a bit of conversation. So here's what we actually know about Wayblazer Dämmerung. It hasn't been released anywhere yet, not even in Japan, so this is going to be a game coming out in both places around the same time, and the Steam page teases a sprawling, non-linear JRPG with 30+ hours of exploration, trust-based systems, and turn-based tactical combat over a richly detailed isometric world. But again, it's important to be upfront that these are adult games, and what makes Eushully stand out though is how they approach that, because fans often praise them for telling stories about relationship between consenting characters with adult elements woven into the narrative rather than used as like shock value. The real lasting appeal about these games though apparently has always been the gameplay. Long-form campaigns, branching class systems, and crunchy tactical combat that rivals some of the genre's biggest names. You just never hear about them because they're stuck in Japan, and here in the West there's also, things are pretty taboo to talk about. Regardless, the community response has been cautiously optimistic, many comparing the game to the kind of magazines that you actually did pick up back in the day for the articles. Even in places that usually avoid eroge talk, like this channel for instance, people are curious and even kind of excited, and there's still some concern though about like the localization and how that's going to be handled, but in general, the vibe is hopeful here and kind of interested in what this could mean for other Eushully titles down the line. If Wayblazer Dämmerung does deliver at the same level of tactical depth that Eushully is known for, would the adult label hold you back, or would you give it a chance based on mechanics and story alone? Personally speaking, I'm not really entirely sure, because on the one hand, it's an annoying trope to have the protagonist with a harem who will never seal the deal with anyone, looking at you every game after Trails in the Sky. But on the other hand, I really don't feel like I need to see what's going on behind closed doors, but hey, different strokes for different folks, right? Moving along to the weekly roundup here, we have some early previews and impressions that have recently come around for a few different games from Square Enix, so let's go ahead and cover some of these. Starting with Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. A few outlets at Gamescom and PAX have shared their first impressions of the upcoming remaster. Hands-on experience, though, praised the 2 playable modes. There's the classic and the enhanced version with enhanced visuals and full voice acting, and a fast-forward feature that eases pacing. A revamped combat timeline inspired by Octopath Traveler improves clarity, and Square Enix also streamlined usability. But again, please note that these impressions come from controlled previews, so consider this more of a limited snapshot rather than like a full verdict. And I encourage you all to wait for multiple full reviews before making a purchase, but things do look very promising early on. Moving along to Dragon Quest I and II HD 2D remakes, the press demos at Gamescom emphasized nostalgia with modern polish, with more HD 2D visuals, faster battle options, expanded narratives, and options like encounter toggles. One person highlighted that an extended dialogue during a mundane scene felt unexpectedly dramatic. Producer Masaaki Hasayaka stressed the balance between innovation and preservation. Too much change risks alienating fans, and too little makes the remake feel superfluous. Plus, there's a really big surprise he teased for those who play the trilogy in order. And for the purpose of clarity, he means in the order of release, like Dragon Quest III, then 1, then 2, and that also happens to be the chronological in-game order of those games. In addition, a new gameplay trailer has teased sigils and scrolls and other quality of life and party flows. The full game will be launching on October 30th on PS5, the Xbox Series consoles, Switch consoles, and PC. The Switch 2 version, though, does appear to be shipping as a game key card from what I can tell so far. Moving along to Octopath Traveler 0, we have more preview footage from Gamescom again here. Octopath Traveler 0 will be retaining core Octopath systems, including break and boost mechanics, multi-character sync, while adding new features and 8-party and town building elements, and no gacha or microtransactions in sight. The town building mode offers a cozy and creative space contrasting with the dungeon battles, and early reactions kind of seesaw between excitement and cautious intrigue. Returning fans are happy with the familiar combat innovations, while some are a little worried about the town mechanic and that it may distract from the narrative focus of the game. So far though, it seems like mixing the classic combat with restful town building looks promising though. Pacing and cohesion remain to be tested, so does building a town and a JRPG entice you as much as a traditional combat, or does it risk distracting you from the story? Personally, I'm kind of a sucker for this sort of thing when it comes to recruiting characters in Suikoden for the castle town, or rebuilding destroyed towns in like Dark Cloud 1 and 2. But I also kind of like them more when they're just kind of on the outskirts and just sort of a side thing rather than the main attraction. And then moving along, we have some other major announcements to get through, including Puzzle Quest Immortal Edition has been announced for September 18. This bundle includes the original Challenge of the Warlords, along with all of its expansions and the Legacy Returns content. It features 4K visuals, a brand new character class, and more than 40 extra items. It's coming to PlayStation 5 and 4 and the Xbox and Switch and PC, and I was kind of scratching my head here for a while, but I guess what makes this relevant is that Puzzle Quest blends tile-matching puzzle games with full RPG-style progression, complete with character classes and gear and quests and build crafting. So community sentiment right now is cautiously excited about this one, with some keeping an eye on whether microtransactions will be a factor at all in the future. Magical Vacation has joined Nintendo Switch Online in Japan. This is a Game Boy Advance JRPG that originally released in 2001 by Brownie Brown. It's often considered kind of a Mana-adjacent sort of title because it was directed by Mana co-creator Koichi Ishii, and shares some of the series' whimsical art style and sprite-based magic system, but unlike Mana though, Magical Vacation is fully turn-based rather than action-oriented, so the closest comparison is really more in tone and atmosphere and not gameplay. Western availability has not been announced, and while some Japanese-only Nintendo Switch Online releases have eventually come west, there's not really any confirmation yet. Fans are pleasantly surprised and feeling nostalgic, especially import players. But don't get your hopes up on this one just yet. Edea and Falcom, though, are partnering with PC Engine Legends. This project will be bringing the classic Falcom titles like Ys, Dragon Slayer, and The Legend of Xanadu to modern platforms. Exact systems and release dates, though, have not yet been confirmed, but preservation-minded fans are, of course, excited to see these influential titles revived and made accessible once again. Touhou Scarlet Curiosity is now available on Switch worldwide. This action RPG starring Remilia and Sakuya have made the leap to Nintendo's handheld, giving Touhou fans a chance to play it on the Go-Ho. I'm sorry. While it's a niche release, players are happy to have the added portability, and that makes it a nice side option while waiting for bigger, full RPGs to land. And for those who aren't aware, this game does currently have very positive reviews on Steam, so it's probably going to be great when it comes to Switch as too. But sadly, this debut on Switch may be overshadowed somewhat by Silksong. Then we have a little bit of information on some DLCs and patches that have come out here, or been announced, including this one from Daemon X Machina, Titanic Scion, which launched worldwide today, and Marvelous shared a new set of trailers alongside with a roadmap for the post-launch content. This roadmap promises new mission types and additional mechs and seasonal content updates in the coming months. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis is currently celebrating its second anniversary with a set of crossover events. Square Enix announced a new collaboration with Advent Children and Final Fantasy XIII and Nier. Players can expect themed costumes, weapons, and limited-time events that draw directly from those entries. While these celebrations are a fun way to mash together Square Enix's back catalog, it's worth remembering that Ever Crisis is a mobile gacha title, so the collaboration function is both fan service and a revenue driver. So fans are excited to see Cloud and his Advent Children look again, but are also wary about how much grinding or spending might be required to unlock this limited edition content. During that Ever Crisis anniversary stream we were just talking about, Tetsuya Nomura reassured fans that both Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 and Kingdom Hearts 4 are progressing smoothly in development. He went a step further by revealing that the timing for the next big announcements have already been decided, and that means that Square Enix has a roadmap in place even if they are not ready to share the details just yet. For fans who have been anxious about potential long delays, I mean, let's be real, Kingdom Hearts fans are used to waiting. For everybody else, this is encouraging news, but it's important to remember that these comments came at a celebratory stream tied to Ever Crisis. It's marketing as much as reassurance, so while the update is of course welcome, it's not quite the same as like a hard production detail being revealed. When that official news announcement does break though, I'll be sure to talk about it here, but when it does happen, what would you like most to see first? An official subtitle, or maybe like a clear list of platforms, or maybe even a peek at the combat systems involved? What are your thoughts? Let me know. And while this next one is probably a bit of a nothing burger, I still felt like talking about it because it got a lot of people interested and kind of excited. In a recent interview, Atari CEO's Wade Rosen expressed interest in bringing back beloved JRPGs like Panzer Dragoon Saga, Ogre Battle, and Snatcher. But I mean, to be clear, this is just like a wish list of cool items that he'd like to do. And Atari obviously doesn't hold the rights to any of these series at this time, so these comments are very much exploratory rather than concrete plans. But still, it's interesting to hear Atari talk about JRPGs as part of their broader retro revival push, right? For longtime fans, the idea of seeing these classics updated for modern hardware is pretty dang excited, but the reality is complicated. Even so though, it reflects a wider recognition that classic JRPGs carry long-lasting cultural and commercial value and, well, hey, just gives you the warm and fuzzies, right? Atari has made serious strides though in reviving older franchises through its ownership of studios like Digital Eclipse and Night Dive, but none of these three titles are owned by Atari, and remasters would require complex licensing deals with like Square Enix. So, I mean, what are the odds of that? Rosen also underscored that passion alone is not enough. These projects would also need enough commercial interest to keep the company viable. And let's talk about some critical reception from the games that came out pretty recently. We already talked about the DLC, but let's dive a little deeper into the actual reception of Daemon X Machina, Titanic Scion. It released on September 5th on PS5, the Switch, and Switch 2, and PC. And the Metacritic page is live, but scores are still kind of coming in. Early reviews are really all over the place though. Fans and critics agree that mech customization is deep and satisfying, and the combat has weight and punch, and the soundtrack fits the high-octane action perfectly. However, several reviewers note that the mission variety wears thin rather quickly and the story lacks emotional heft. And there are also, of course, performance hiccups, especially on Switch 2 where frame drops are pretty common. A reviewer on RPG site noted that while the open world gives players freedom, it does still feel empty and sometimes padded with repetitive side tasks. So, classic open world struggles, really. Moving along, Dark Deity 2 is now available for Switch and Switch 2 and PC. On PC, the Metacritic average is currently at 77, and Steam reviews are giving it kind of mixed reviews, honestly, hovering around 63% positive. Compared to the first game, this sequel scores better on map design, pacing, and class customization. Reviewers do note that the combat feels truly tuned at this point, and many welcome the enhanced hierarchy of systems and strategic flexibility. Some are reporting though that the user interface can be clunky in places and the writing doesn't really land consistently, fluctuating between engaging and forgettable. Some players do note that while the characters are likable, the story doesn't really dig as deep as they'd hope it would. Dark Deity 2 is shaping up to be a reliable, refined spiritual successor for strategy RPG fans, especially for those who maybe care more about systems than the story itself. And then Adventure of Samsara released on September 4 for PS5, the Xbox, Switch, and PC, and early reviews are kind of likening it to a punishing-style Metroidvania with tight combat, inventive boss design, and interconnected world that rewards careful exploration. However, some Switch players have also reported occasional crashes and overly stiff controls. Early impressions so far suggest that fans of old school challenge will find a lot to love here, but there may be some rough edges, especially for those playing on Switch hardware. And then moving on to some SuperDerek news. Bit of a quiet week for me as far as releasing videos, but not because I've slowed down at all, but because the videos that I plan to make are turning out to be much larger projects than I kind of expected. Of course, I have the $100 indie console project that is still underway, but I keep learning about new cool things that might be able to explore with it, and honestly, it's taking a lot of time to explore with that. But the more that I do, the more promise this thing has, so stick around because I think this one's really going to blow your mind without blowing your wallet. The other thing I decided to do when I realized the $100 indie console would take longer to put together is a deep dive into the situation surrounding Chained Echoes and First Press Games, and covering the saga from the Kickstarter through the various delays all the way to where we are now. I am personally pretty invested in this. I'm hoping to get my own physical copy of this game someday, and it feels like I've been learning a lot the deeper I go into this rabbit hole, so hopefully I can finish this one up next week. I also got to meet with my friends over at Switch Wicked, and we've been actually starting to figure out some of the logistics of actually shipping some of these mugs out. I mentioned it here last week, but I think it bears mentioning again that these handcrafted stoneware tankards will be offered up for dibs first to YouTube channel members and Patreon supporters and Twitch subscribers first via the Discord. Just sort of a small way of me saying thank you for your continued support. We're still trying to figure out what it will cost to package and then ship them out. Since everything here is, well, custom and handmade, we don't really have the special foam inserts and stuff that would allow them to survive a nuclear blast, so R&D is underway to ensure these help survive their random encounters with the Postal Service. And now it's time for today's JRPG 10-day forecast, and so far, everything seems pretty quiet this week in terms of releases. Seems like nobody really wants to contend with Silksong this week, and I honestly can't blame them. But on September 11th, The Edge of Allegoria is coming to the Nintendo Switch. This is a turn-based RPG from Button Factory Games that's hitting the Switch eShop on September 11, following its December 2024 PC release, where it currently has very positive reviews. It's styled much like a Game Boy era adventure title, but packs mature humor and plenty of attitude. Expect classic monster battles, skill mastery, and loot-heavy progression with a healthy dose of dark, irreverent humor. Following that, on September 15th, Grey Heritage Noble Duty is an indie strategy RPG love letter to Fire Emblem, serving as a prequel to 2022's Grey Heritage Faded Vision. In this, you'll recruit allies and fight through a 10-hour-plus campaign of turn-based battles with quality retro art. Looking ahead into late September is when things are really going to start blowing up, though, with first Trails in the Sky First Chapter, and then Atelier and the Ivalice Chronicles, so make sure to get through your backlog as quickly as possible because it's going to be one heck of a fall. And if you're new here and if you liked what you saw and like to get caught up quickly about this whole crazy week, well, make sure you get subscribed to help support me on my path to going full-time on YouTube, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great day, everyone.